Before you count sheep, count mysteries.
For nearly 4 years, one question haunted a family in Milwaukee. Where was Joniah Walker? On June 23, 2022, Joniah was just 15 years old when she disappeared from her neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Surveillance cameras captured her walking near her home, carrying a large backpack. Then, she vanished. There were no confirmed sightings, no phone calls, no clear explanation. Her family spent years searching for answers, while investigators continued trying to determine what had happened to the teenager. For almost 4 years, Joniah's disappearance remained a mystery. Her mother believed she had been lured away by someone she met online, but for a long time, there was no evidence that could explain where she had gone. Then, on May 25, 2026, everything changed. Joniah was found alive. She was no longer the 15-year-old girl who had disappeared from Milwaukee. She was now 19 years old. But finding Joniah was only the beginning. Investigators now allege that she had been abducted and taken out of Wisconsin, and a 37-year-old Virginia man, Owen Anderson, has been charged with kidnapping, child enticement, and abduction of a child. Those are allegations, and the case is still moving through the legal system. So where was Joniah for all those years? How did a teenager disappear from Milwaukee and remain missing until she was found nearly 4 years later? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, what happened during the years when nobody knew where she was? This, for Joniah's family, the weeks after her disappearance quickly turned into months, and the months eventually turned into years. The last confirmed image of her remained the same. A 15-year-old girl walking away from home in Milwaukee with a large backpack on June 23, 2022. After that moment, there were no confirmed sightings that could tell investigators where she had gone. Her family refused to let the case disappear. They continued searching, speaking publicly about Joniah, and asking anyone who might have information to come forward. Her mother also believed that someone Joniah had met online could have played a role in her disappearance. That possibility became particularly concerning because Joniah had apparently removed much of her digital footprint before she vanished. But suspicion wasn't enough. Investigators still needed evidence that could explain what had happened to her. As the years passed, Joniah remained listed as a missing person. Her case was included among Milwaukee's long-term missing person investigations, and authorities released updated images showing what she might look like as she grew older. The hope was that someone, somewhere, would recognize her. But there was another painful reality. Joniah was growing up while her family was still searching for the 15-year-old girl who had disappeared. By 2026, she would no longer be a teenager. She would be 19 years old. And then, almost 4 years after the disappearance, something happened that nobody had been able to make happen through years of searching. On May 25, 2026, Joniah Walker was found alive and safe. Milwaukee police confirmed that she had been located, but initially released very few details about where she had been found or what had happened during the years she was missing. For her family, the impossible had happened. Joniah was alive, but the mystery wasn't over. In fact, it had just become much bigger, because now investigators had to answer a completely different question. Where had Joniah been for nearly 4 years? Is the story of Joniah Walker. On June 23, 2022, Joniah Walker was 15 years old. She was living with her mother in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and to her family, that Thursday initially seemed completely ordinary. Her mother saw her that morning before leaving for work, and the two spoke on the phone several times throughout the day. Joniah was also supposed to meet her father that afternoon so they could go and get a work permit for a summer job. Nothing about the day suggested that this would be the last time her family would know where she was. But sometime that afternoon, something changed. A nearby Ring camera captured Joniah leaving the apartment complex at around 2:30 p.m. She was carrying a large green backpack. It was one of the last confirmed images of her before she disappeared. About an hour later, her father arrived to pick her up, but Joniah wasn't there. Her phone wasn't being answered, and the calls were going straight to voicemail. Her mother immediately realized that something was wrong. The backpack would become one of the most important details in the early investigation. Joniah's mother later said that she had never seen her daughter leave with that particular bag before. To her, it suggested that Joniah had planned to be away for longer than usual. And because Joniah had never disappeared like this before, her family didn't believe she had simply decided to stay away for a few hours. They began searching for her. Police were contacted. Her photograph was circulated. And eventually, Joniah's case was entered into national missing person systems. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children later released an age-progressed image showing what she might look like as she grew older, hoping someone somewhere would recognize her. But there was a disturbing possibility that Joniah's mother couldn't ignore. She believed her daughter may have been lured away by someone she had met online. Joniah had apparently been communicating with people online, and according to her mother, she had also erased much of her digital footprint before disappearing. That made the situation even more difficult to understand. Was Joniah planning to leave on her own? Had someone convinced her to go somewhere? Or had someone deliberately manipulated a 15-year-old girl into trusting them? At the time, there were no answers. Only a teenager walking away from home with a backpack, and a family desperately trying to figure out where she had gone. For the next 4 years, that question would remain unanswered, until one day in May 2026, police received a call that would completely change the case. For years, Joniah's family could only guess what had happened to her. They believed she may have been lured away by someone she met online. But without Joniah, investigators had very little information that could explain where she had gone. Police later said they had found no evidence that she was involved in human trafficking, and the circumstances of her disappearance remained unclear. Then, after Joniah was found in May 2026, investigators began putting the pieces together. According to authorities and court documents reported by multiple news organizations, Joniah had been communicating online with a man named Owen Lars Anderson. Investigators allege that she traveled from Milwaukee to Chicago to meet him when she was 15. From there, she was allegedly taken to Virginia, hundreds of miles away from her home. These allegations have not been proven in court. The case took another dramatic turn when police discovered Joniah at a home in Blacksburg, Virginia. Investigators had initially responded to a domestic disturbance at the property. During the investigation that followed, they discovered that one of the people involved was a juvenile reported missing from Wisconsin years earlier. That person was Joniah. She was 19 years old, and she was alive. But investigators alleged that her years away from home had been anything but normal. According to the allegations, Anderson had control where Joniah could go and had prevented her from attending school. Investigators also alleged that he attempted to erase her digital trail by getting rid of phones connected to her. The exact circumstances of those years are still being investigated, and many details remain allegations rather than established facts. Anderson was arrested in May 2026 and faces serious charges connected to the case, including abduction-related offenses. He is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. But there was something particularly disturbing about the timeline. If investigators are correct, this wasn't a stranger who suddenly appeared in Joniah's life in 2022. The two had allegedly known each other online before she disappeared. That meant the disappearance may not have begun on the day Joniah left Milwaukee. It may have started much earlier with a conversation on a screen. A teenager, an adult she believed she could trust, and a relationship that investigators now say eventually led her hundreds of miles away from home. For nearly 4 years, Joniah's family had no idea where she was, and the person they believe was responsible may have been communicating with her long before anyone realized she was in danger. For nearly 4 years, Joniah's family had no idea where she was. They knew she had disappeared at 15, but they didn't know whether she had left voluntarily, whether someone had taken her, or whether she was somewhere far from Milwaukee. Even after she was found alive, investigators initially released very few details about what had happened during those missing years. Then the investigation began to reveal a much darker story. According to court documents and statements reported after Joniah's recovery, investigators allege that she had been communicating online with Owen Lars Anderson for years before she disappeared. Joniah reportedly told police that their communication began when she was around 12 years old, and that Anderson gradually gained her trust before convincing her to meet him in person when she was 15. These are allegations contained in the criminal case and have not been proven in court. The meeting allegedly took place in Chicago. According to the account described by investigators, Joniah traveled from Milwaukee to Chicago after an Uber was arranged for her. She was supposed to meet Anderson and go to a movie. Instead, investigators allege that after they met, Anderson took control of the situation and transported her to Virginia. And that was the beginning of a 4-year period in which her family had no idea where she was. Joniah later told investigators that she had been kept inside Anderson's home and prevented from attending school or maintaining normal contact with the outside world. She also alleged that Anderson threatened her family if she attempted to leave or reveal where she was. Investigators further alleged that he discarded her phones and attempted to eliminate digital traces connecting her to him. But there is an important distinction between what investigators allege and what has been proven. Anderson has been charged with serious offenses, including kidnapping-related charges, but he remains legally presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. And yet, the fact that Joniah was eventually found alive means that one of the biggest questions surrounding her disappearance can finally be answered. She hadn't simply vanished. She had been somewhere. She had been living hundreds of miles from her family. And for years, the people who love her had no idea where to look. Then, completely unexpectedly, the investigation would take another turn. Because Joniah wasn't discovered through a new missing person tip, or a DNA match, or a breakthrough in the original investigation. She was found because police responded to something that initially had nothing to do with her disappearance. A domestic disturbance call. And what officers discovered inside that Virginia home would finally bring Joniah's 4-year disappearance to an end. For nearly 4 years, Joniah Walker had remained a missing person. Then, on May 23, 2026, police in Blacksburg, Virginia, responded to what initially appeared to be an unrelated domestic disturbance at a local home. Officers dealt with the immediate situation and transported the person who had reported the incident to a local resource center. But as investigators looked more closely at what had happened at the property, they discovered something they weren't expecting. One of the people connected to the address was a young woman who had been reported missing from Wisconsin years earlier. Turned Zero News 2. She was Joniah Walker. The teenager who had disappeared at 15 was now 19 years old. For her family, the news meant something. Joniah was alive. After years of searching, wondering, and waiting, they finally knew where she was. But the circumstances surrounding her discovery immediately raised new questions. Investigators obtained a search warrant for the home and began examining what had happened there. According to police, the investigation led to serious charges against Owen Lars Anderson, including abduction of a child, immoral acts with a juvenile, strangulation, child abuse, and preventing a 911 call. Additional charges were also expected as the investigation continued. Turned Zero News 28. Authorities in Wisconsin later filed their own charges against Anderson, including kidnapping, child enticement, and child abduction. He remains presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. Turn Zero Search 3. But perhaps the most remarkable part of the story was how Joniah was finally discovered. It wasn't the result of a new national search. It wasn't a dramatic police raid specifically targeting a missing person case. It began with a completely different call, a domestic disturbance. One ordinary police response that unexpectedly reopened a case that had remained unanswered for almost 4 years. And suddenly, the photograph that had once shown a 15-year-old missing girl no longer represented someone who might still be out there. Joniah had been found. She had survived. But now investigators had to understand what happened during the years between the day she disappeared and the moment police finally found her. Because finding Joniah answered one question that had haunted her family for years. What happened to her while she was gone? Finding Joniah alive should have been the end of the mystery. After nearly 4 years of searching, her family finally knew that she had survived. But the moment the investigation moved forward, a much darker picture began to emerge. According to investigators, Joniah had first communicated with Owen Anderson online when she was only 12 years old. Over the following years, their relationship allegedly continued through platforms including Kik, Discord, and Signal. Investigators say Anderson gradually gained her trust and eventually convinced the 15-year-old to travel from Milwaukee to Chicago to meet him. These allegations are part of the criminal case and have not been proven in court. What happened next is at the center of the investigation. Authorities allege that after meeting Joniah in Chicago, Anderson took her to Virginia, where she remained for almost 4 years. According to information attributed to Joniah's account in court documents, she was kept inside the home, prevented from attending school, and threatened with consequences if she tried to leave or contact her family. Investigators also allege that Anderson disposed of phones connected to Joniah in an attempt to eliminate traces of their communication. But there's another question that is difficult to ignore. How did nobody find her? For almost 4 years, Joniah was hundreds of miles away from Milwaukee. Her family continued searching while she was allegedly living inside a home in Virginia. The case now raises questions not only about the man accused of holding her, but also about how a missing 15-year-old could remain hidden for so long. And then there is the question of the internet. Joniah's story began online. A conversation with a stranger. A relationship built through messages. And eventually, according to investigators, a journey that ended hundreds of miles from home. Her case demonstrates how difficult it can be for families and investigators to know what is happening behind a teenager's online interactions. Someone can appear to be communicating privately with a friend, while the person on the other side of the screen may be hiding an entirely different identity. Still, there are many details that investigators have not publicly explained. Why exactly did Joniah agree to travel to Chicago? What happened immediately after she met Anderson? How was she able to survive those 4 years? And perhaps most importantly, why did she remain there until police finally arrived? Those questions may eventually be answered in court. For now, Anderson faces serious charges and remains presumed innocent unless proven guilty. But one thing is no longer a mystery. Joniah Walker disappeared as a 15-year-old girl, and 4 years later, she was found alive. Her family finally got the answer they had been waiting for. But the full story of those missing years is only now beginning to emerge. For nearly 4 years, Joniah Walker's family lived with the possibility that they might never see her again. She disappeared as a 15-year-old girl, leaving behind only a few clues and a family desperate for answers. Then, in May 2026, that nightmare finally changed. Joniah was found alive in Virginia. She was 19 years old. The girl her family had been searching for had grown up during the years she was missing. And although the circumstances surrounding those years are now part of a criminal investigation, one thing was finally certain. Joniah was alive. Her disappearance also exposed something deeply disturbing about how easily a vulnerable teenager can be manipulated online. According to investigators, Joniah had been communicating with Owen Anderson for years before she disappeared, beginning when she was only 12. Authorities allege that he eventually convinced her to travel to Chicago before taking her to Virginia, where she was held against her will. Anderson faces serious criminal charges and remains presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. But Joniah's story is different from many missing person cases. There is no grave to search for, no remains waiting to be identified, no final gudvie. Instead, there is a young woman who survived something that kept her hidden from her family for almost 4 years. And now she has a chance to tell her own story. There are still questions that may take years to answer. What exactly happened after she left Milwaukee? How was she kept hidden for so long? What did investigators miss during those first years? And what will happen to the man accused of taking her away? Those answers will ultimately have to come through the investigation and the courts. But for Joniah's family, the most important answer has already arrived. They know where she is, and after nearly 4 years of wondering whether they would ever see their daughter again, Joniah is finally home. Sometimes, a missing person case doesn't end with a body being discovered. Sometimes, it ends with someone walking back through the door. And after 4 years, Joniah Walker finally did.